The Rose of Autumn Creek by Nathaniel Bishop. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, casting a warm, honeyed glow over the sleepy town of Autumn Creek. The soft September breeze carried the comforting sense of wood smoke and freshly baked bread from Mrs. Baker's Inn, mingling with the earthy aromas of leather and hay from the livery stable. Along the town's main road, horses clattered by, their hooves creating a rhythmic melody against the weathered cobblestones, while townsfolk hurried about, finishing their evening errands before dusk settled in. It was a typical autumn evening in 1875, but for one particular man, it marked the beginning of something extraordinary. Nathaniel Hawke stood leaning against the weathered post of Henderson's general store, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. His arms were crossed over his chest, and a slight frown creased his sun-weathered brow beneath the brim of his well-worn hat. At 32, he had earned every line on his face through years of honest work on his ranch, and today, those lines were deeper than usual. He had just come from the blacksmith's, where a minor disagreement over the cost of shoeing his prized mare had left him in a brooding mood. Despite his current demeanor, Nathaniel was known throughout Autumn Creek as a fair and honest man, always willing to lend a helping hand to a neighbor in need. His ranch might not have been the largest in the territory, but it was well maintained, a testament to his dedication and hard work. Yet he was also stubborn as a mule when he believed he was in the right, and the clash over a few coins had been enough to set his jaw tight with frustration. As he stood contemplating whether to head back to his ranch or linger in town a while longer, a flash of color caught his eye. Across the street, a woman emerged from old Dr. Morrison's apothecary shop, carrying a basket brimming with dried herbs and glass bottles. Her auburn hair was pinned up neatly beneath a modest bonnet, with a few rebellious curls dancing around her face in the evening breeze. She wore a simple lavender dress, but there was something in the way she carried herself that made the ordinary garment seem extraordinary. Nathaniel straightened, his earlier frustration forgotten. He had seen her before, always from a distance, during her first few weeks in town. The local gossips had been buzzing with speculation about her arrival, sharing whispered theories over tea and during Sunday services. What was known for certain was that she had come to help her ailing uncle, Dr. Morrison, whose hands had grown too shaky to measure his medicines properly. Some said she had trained with doctors back east, while others claimed she was running from a broken engagement. Whatever the truth was, she had managed to stir something in Nathaniel's heart that he hadn't felt since losing his parents 5 years ago. Before he could talk himself out of it, he pushed away from the post and started across the dusty street. The woman was adjusting the strap of her basket, her head tilted slightly as if lost in thought. Nathaniel hesitated mid-stride, feeling a sudden wave of self-consciousness. What was he going to say? He wasn't known for his silver tongue, and the last thing he wanted was to make a fool of himself in the middle of town. But fate had other plans. Before he could retreat, she looked up and their eyes met. Her green eyes, bright as spring leaves, locked onto his, and she offered a smile that seemed to hold both politeness and a hint of amusement. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the refined tones of an Eastern education, yet warm and unpretentious. Nathaniel tipped his hat, trying to remember all the manners his mother had drilled into him years ago. "Evening, ma'am. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Name's Nathaniel. Nathaniel Hawke." "Emily Rosewood," she replied, shifting her basket to her other arm with practiced grace. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hawke." For a moment they stood in companionable silence, the evening bustle of Autumn Creek continuing around them. Emily was the first to break the quiet. "I've heard quite a bit about you, Mr. Hawke. You have a ranch just outside of town, don't you?" "That's right," he nodded, relieved to have familiar ground to stand on. "About 3 miles out, near Crystal Creek. Not the biggest spread around, but it keeps me busy enough." "I imagine it must," Emily said, glancing down at her basket before meeting his eyes again. "I'm still adjusting to life here myself. Autumn Creek is considerably smaller than Boston, but there's something special about it." Nathaniel felt a smile tugging at his lips. "That's one way to put it. Reckon folks here could use a bit of refining, especially this time of year when everyone's rushing to prepare for winter." Emily's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Are you including yourself in that assessment, Mr. Hawke?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing she had caught him in his own words. "Well, that's not exactly what I'm only teasing," she said, her laughter light and musical. "In truth, I've found everyone here to be wonderfully welcoming. Mrs. Baker at the inn has practically adopted me, making sure I eat proper meals and don't work too hard at the apothecary." "That sounds like Sarah Baker all right," Nathaniel chuckled. "She's been mothering this whole town since before I can remember." Emily's smile softened. "It's one of the reasons I already feel at home here. Everyone has been so kind." The conversation lulled into a comfortable silence, and Nathaniel found himself wanting to know more about this intriguing woman. He wanted to ask about her life in Boston, about what had really brought her to Autumn Creek, and whether she planned to stay. But the moment felt delicate, like the first frost of winter that could either strengthen or wither a late-blooming flower. "Well, I should be getting back," Emily said, though she seemed reluctant to move. "Uncle James will be wondering where his herbs are. It was lovely meeting you properly, Mr. Hawke." "Likewise, Miss Rosewood," Nathaniel replied, tipping his hat once more. "Perhaps I'll see you around town again." "I'd like that," she said softly, and with a final smile that seemed to linger in the air like autumn sunshine, she turned and walked away, leaving Nathaniel standing in the middle of the street, his heart beating a rhythm as steady as horse hooves on cobblestones. As the weeks passed, Nathaniel found himself making increasingly frequent trips into town. A loose horseshoe, a depleted supply of coffee, a fence post that needed replacing. Any excuse would do if it meant a chance to pass by the apothecary's shop. Sometimes he would catch only a glimpse of Emily through the window, arranging her herbs or helping a customer. Other times she would be outside tending to the small garden of medicinal plants she had started behind the shop. But no matter how busy she was, she always had a warm smile and a few kind words for him. One crisp October afternoon, as golden leaves danced on the breeze, Nathaniel found himself standing in front of the apothecary, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He had no real reason to be there, but something had drawn him into town like a compass finding true north. Just as he was about to turn away, the shop door opened, and Emily stepped out, blinking in the bright autumn sunlight. "Mr. Hawke," she said, pleasantly surprised. "What brings you to town today?" "Just passing through," he said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Thought I'd see how you're settling in." Emily's knowing smile told him she saw right through his excuse. "As it happens, I could use some assistance. Mrs. Baker has requested a fresh supply of medicinal teas, and I have quite a few jars to deliver. Would you mind lending me a hand?" "It would be my pleasure," Nathaniel replied, perhaps a bit too quickly, but Emily's bright smile made his eagerness worthwhile. As they walked side by side through town, their conversation flowed as naturally as Crystal Creek after the spring thaw. Emily shared stories of her life in Boston, where she had studied healing arts under her grandmother's tutelage. She spoke of bustling streets and grand buildings, but also of the loneliness she had felt amid the crowds. Nathaniel, in turn, told her about his ranch, about the peace he found in working the land and caring for his animals. "It must be wonderful," Emily said thoughtfully, "having such a strong connection to the land. In Boston, everything feels removed from nature. Here you can feel the rhythm of the seasons in your bones." Nathaniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "It's not always easy, but there's satisfaction in it. Every sunrise brings new challenges, but also new possibilities." By the time they reached the inn, both were reluctant to part ways. Mrs. Baker greeted them with a knowing smile that made Nathaniel's ears turn red, but he couldn't bring himself to mind. Something was growing between him and Emily, something as natural and inevitable as the changing of seasons. As autumn deepened, their friendship blossomed like the last roses of the season. They attended the harvest festival together, where Emily's laughter rang out clear and true as they joined in the dancing. They took long walks by Crystal Creek, watching the leaves turn from green to gold to crimson. Sometimes they would talk for hours, and other times they would simply enjoy each other's company in comfortable silence. But Nathaniel could sense that Emily was holding something back, a shadow that occasionally darkened her bright eyes. He didn't press her, knowing that some things needed time to unfold, like flowers waiting for the right moment to bloom. One evening in late November, as the first snowflakes began to fall, they stood together by Crystal Creek. The water rushed past, dark and swift, while the world around them grew quiet under winter's approaching blanket. "Nathaniel," Emily said softly, turning to face him. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and snowflakes caught in her hair like tiny stars. "There's something I need to tell you." He felt his heart skip a beat, but kept his voice steady. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly together. "When I came here to help Uncle James, I didn't plan to stay. I was supposed to return to Boston once he recovered. That was the arrangement with my family." Nathaniel's heart sank, but he waited, knowing there was more to come. "But now," Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly, "now I can't imagine leaving. This place, these people, you," She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm scared, Nathaniel. Scared of disappointing my family, of choosing a different path than the one they planned for me. But I'm more scared of leaving and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Nathaniel stepped closer, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Emily," he said softly, "I know I'm not a wealthy man, and I can't offer you the kind of life you had in Boston. But I can promise you this, if you choose to stay, you'll never have to face any challenge alone. Whatever comes our way, we'll face it together." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek, but she was smiling. "I never cared about wealth or status, Nathaniel. What I found here, what I found with you, is worth more than all the fine houses in Boston." Heart swelling with joy, Nathaniel pulled her close and kissed her, a gentle kiss that held all the promise of tomorrow. As the snow fell around them, turning the world white and new, they held each other close, two hearts beating as one beneath the winter sky. In the years that followed, Autumn Creek would remember that winter as the season when love bloomed despite the frost. Emily never did return to Boston, except to visit with Nathaniel at her side. Instead, she built a life in the small frontier town, combining her Eastern medical knowledge with local healing traditions. The apothecary shop flourished under her care, and so did her love for the quiet rancher who had stolen her heart. Their wedding the following spring was a town-wide celebration, with Miss Baker baking enough pies to feed half the territory. Dr. Morrison, fully recovered thanks to Emily's care, gave his niece away with tears in his eyes and joy in his heart. And as Nathaniel and Emily exchanged their vows beneath an arch of spring flowers, everyone agreed that they had never seen a more perfect match. Together, they built a life filled with love, laughter, and purpose. The ranch prospered under their combined care, and Emily's healing practice brought comfort to countless families. They faced challenges, as all couples do, but they faced them hand in hand, just as Nathaniel had promised on that snowy evening by the creek. And on quiet evenings, long after their story had become part of Autumn Creek's history, they would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, grateful for that chance meeting that had changed their lives forever. For in finding each other, they had found not just love, but a home where both their hearts could flourish, as eternal as the changing seasons, and as constant as the creek that had witnessed their first kiss.